Let me look at Goodreads and see what I said, because I don't remember particulars, because I wanted to forget this book. Hello everybody, welcome back to a new video. My name is Sarah and today we're going to be going over my May wrap-up. So in May I ended up reading 7 books and we ran the gamut with ratings. We actually had 2 5-stars and my very first 1-star rating. So I'm just gonna go through each book that I read this month, kind of give a general overview of what it's about, and then my thoughts, and do the wrap-up. Yeah, so I'm just gonna hop right into it. So the first book that I read this month is Stranger Dreamer by Laini Taylor. This is the first book in the Stranger Dreamer duology. So this is a YA fantasy, and we follow our main character, Laszlo Strange, who is a junior librarian, and he has always dreamed of visiting this mythical lost city called Weep. And then one day, a troop of people from Weep come through his town and announce that they are looking for people to take back to Weep in order to help them kind of solve a problem that they have run into in the city. And so Laszlo ends up volunteering and finding himself on this journey to Weep, where he kind of learns about what happened to the city, why it suddenly become a lost city, and kind of what their problem is and how they need it fixed. And then while there, he starts having these really weird dreams of a blue-skinned goddess. So I really love this book. This is the first Laini Taylor book that I've ever read, and I've heard so many things about her and her writing and how it just sounds like it's right up my alley, and it definitely is. Laini Taylor's writing style is really elegant and very easy to read. I think what I liked the best was that there's a sense of simplicity to her writing, but then when she finds a time to kind of pull out the purple prose, it's like full force, beautiful lyrical writing that really adds to kind of the imagery or the emotion of the story, and she knows just when to employ it and when to hold back on it in order to really make that imagery or that emotion pack a lot more of a punch. This was really kind of a refreshing read. I found that the story and just the world building and like everything behind Weep and like how she built the city and the history behind it was very imaginative. Like in general, this isn't like a super complex story. There's just like a very fresh and new feel to the story, I guess, if that makes sense. And I think that's what I really liked about it. And what's also really interesting is that, so this is written in dual perspective for the most part. There are a couple scenes where we do follow some other side characters, just like for 1 or 2 brief scenes, but for the most part this is written in dual perspective, from Laszlo's perspective and then from another character, Sari. More in Laszlo's case, what's really interesting is that he's kind of more of like an observer of what's going on. When it comes to kind of figuring out what's wrong with Weep and solving it, it's very interesting because this is like not a story where our main character is the kind of propelling force of like making things happen. It's more, Laszlo's more like just an observer and kind of along for the ride, and he's not really like super affected by anything, and it's just kind of a really interesting perspective to take on a story, whereas I feel like in most fantasies, especially in YA, our main characters are the propelling force. They are like the leaders or in the middle of the action and the source of like figuring out the problem and like employing the solution and stuff, or like they're the ones that are directly impacted by whatever the issue is. And like in Sari's case, that like she is directly impacted by a lot of the things, at least more so than Laszlo is. But it was kind of a really interesting perspective to take on the story. And the story did take a very interesting turn where it kind of felt like it moved away from the story of Weep itself, and it turned into more of like this really sweet romance, which I wasn't expecting, but I did really enjoy because it was very fluffy and innocent and sweet, and I just really loved it. And I just adored Laszlo as a character. You do not get many like main male leading protagonists that are like gentle, soft cinnamon roll-esque characters, and that's exactly what Laszlo is. And so that was another thing that was like very refreshing about this book, is that, you know, a lot of main male characters, especially in YA fantasy, are kind of the cool, sarcastic kind of guys, or you're like really hardened, brute kind of people, but it's not, you don't get a lot of like really soft, gentle, kind of more whimsical, head in the clouds male characters. You see that more in females. And so it was just another really interesting and refreshing take on the story, and I just really enjoyed it, and I'm really looking forward to continuing the series, because the way this one ended, I am anticipating a very drastic change in the tone of everything, and I'm really interested to see how that's gonna play out. I feel like it ended in kind of a cliche way. The general thing that happened felt cliche, but it also felt very, very necessary in order to propel the story forward, and so I wasn't like unhappy with it. I am very interested to see where this ends up going, and I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars, and I am very much looking forward to continuing with Muse of Nightmares, hopefully in June. And then the second book that I read in May is The Dream Thieves by Maggie Stiefvater. This is the second book in the Raven Cycle series. So since this is the second book, I am going to kind of just talk about more what the first one is about in order to not spoil the rest of the series. So the first book is The Raven Boys, and we follow our main character, Blue, who is the daughter of a psychic, and then 4 boys who go to a private school. They're called the Raven Boys, and the story is about how Blue kind of gets wrapped up in the boys' kind of quest to find this long lost hidden Welsh king who is said to be in an eternal slumber, and whoever finds him and wakes him up gets granted one wish. The story just kind of slowly follows the 4 boys and Blue as they kind of try to piece together where this Welsh king is hidden. And so I really, really loved the first book a lot. I gave it 4.5 stars, so I was really excited to dive into this one, especially with how the first book kind of ended in this like, let me just drop this huge bomb of information and then leave you to wait until you pick up the second book. Not necessarily a cliffhanger, but like a just revelation, all right, we're done, and you have to pick up the second book to figure out kind of more details on that. And so I was really, really excited about it. I enjoyed this one, just not nearly as much as I enjoyed the first one. I did like how this was much more focused on Ronan as a character, because I find him to be really fascinating. He's just this very like angry, brutish character, and he's just really interesting to kind of delve into his head, and I think Stiefvater did a really good job kind of exploring him a little bit more. This still had a very meandering plot, which is like how the first one was. However, where I liked it in the first one, I wasn't as much of a fan of it in this one. And it wasn't that I didn't enjoy like the events that were happening. I did find it very interesting. I just found it to be a little less atmospheric, which is what I really liked about the meandering plot of the first one. And so this one was just a little less so. There was quite a bit more action, but it was another case where I really didn't know where we were going with the story, and like where everything that was happening in this book was gonna really tie into the story overall, until like towards the end we got to a couple scenes where I was like, okay, this makes sense, where it's gonna end up pushing the overall plot of the whole series a little further. I feel like there was just a lot that was maybe like chess pieces being set up and put into place, but like we won't know the real importance of them until later in the series. I don't know, we'll see. I wish I liked this one as much as I liked the first one because, like I said, I really like Ronan as a character. I liked the exploration that we went through with him. It was very interesting, it just didn't grip me as much as the first one. I did end up giving this one 3.5 stars, and I am very, very excited to continue the series because this one did actually end in a cliffhanger, and I am very intrigued to see where the rest of it goes. And then after that, I read Constellation of Scars by Melissa Escu-Osley. This was an arc granted to me by the publisher through NetGalley, so thank you so much to the publisher and NetGalley. I do really appreciate getting access to this. However, this was the first book that I've ever given a 1-star rating. There have been books that I have not enjoyed. However, when I run into those types of books, I usually try to find at least like one point of the book that I can like use as a kind of reason for somebody else to maybe find enjoyment out of it and to recommend it to them. And those types of books I usually end up giving like 2 stars because there is something in there that like is a positive point. However, I could not find a single positive point to talk about in this book. There was not one thing where I was like, somebody who's new to the genre might like this, or some people like this trope, so it is in here, or some people might like this character. I don't want to dwell on this too terribly long because I do know, like, obviously the author put a lot of time into writing this. The publishers and the printers and everything, everybody, they all put time into creating this story. And I understand that, and I appreciate the time and effort that went into this. So I don't want to dwell on it too long. First of all, I'm not entirely sure what genre this book is even supposed to fall under. It felt like it should have fallen under maybe magical realism, but then maybe thriller, horror. When I went into it, I was under the impression that it was a horror novel. After finishing it, I don't think so. Basically, we follow a young woman who every month grows pearls out of her back, and her mother kind of holds her hostage. Hostage. Her mother doesn't see it as holding her hostage. She claims she is protecting her daughter. The girl, on the other hand, is like, you don't let me even leave the house. So very much like a Rapunzel-esque thing. And the mother harvests the pearls off of the girl's back and uses this to kind of fund their way of living. And so one day, the girl, she's like in her 20s now, and she escapes and runs away, and she ends up kind of getting picked up by this troupe of performers who are kind of creating this museum of people with different sorts of like physical abnormalities. I was super, super intrigued by the whole plot line. That's why I wanted to read this book, and I was super excited about it, and I was immensely disappointed. The writing style is entirely tell instead of show, to the point where it felt like I was just reading a grocery list of events that were happening. I felt zero connection to any of the characters. I felt like I was kind of watching through like a window as all the events were going on. The whole last third of the book made everything that happened before it, with like the museum and the performers and all of that, feel completely irrelevant. It felt like 2 separate stories almost. The dialogue between the characters was super stale and stilted, and that aided in like not creating any sort of reader character kind of connection. Like, I just did not care about these characters. I had like very, very limited idea of even who these characters were. And then the whole end sequence of scenes, the emotional reactions of all of the characters that were involved made little to no sense at all. Like, the events were like traumatic events. People then just like kind of reacted and then were completely fine the next page, as if they like didn't go through this like horrific event, or like they just didn't have any reaction at all, and it just did not make any sense to me. I would have given it 2 stars up to this point. Then there was a very, very sensitive, triggering topic involved in the last third of this book. It was not handled well at all. It was not written well at all. It's a very delicate topic. I will list it down below in the kind of description box in case you are interested in the trigger warning. It's something that is very sensitive, and it was handled very poorly. And then it turns out it was used more as like a scare tactic, shock value piece in the book, and it ended up adding absolutely nothing to the plot. It was not necessary at all. I do not like that something that sensitive was used as shock value, and because of that, and because of how poorly it was handled, I ended up putting this as a 1-star book. Then following that, I picked up A Sorcery of Thrones by Margaret Rogerson. I officially love Margaret Rogerson as an author. She is officially an auto-buy author for me. Like, she can publish anything and I'm going to immediately want to grab it and read it. I absolutely adored An Enchantment of Ravens when I read it earlier this year, so I was really, really excited to pick this up, and I loved this one so, so much. So in this book, we follow our main character, Elizabeth, who is a library apprentice, and she's training to be a warden of a library because these are not normal libraries. These hold grimoires that are sentient and quite feisty. They're often quite dangerous and hard to handle, and so she is training to be a warden in order to look after these grimoires and books and protect the books and also the citizens of the towns that the libraries are centered in. And these books, if they become damaged, they turn into these like monstrous creatures, and one day that ends up happening through some sort of library sabotage, and Elizabeth, in her attempt to save the day, ends up kind of being framed, and so then she is arrested and escorted to the capital in order to be tried for unleashing this grimoire, and there she ends up enlisting the help of a sorcerer, which is kind of like a huge taboo because the apprentices and everybody that works in the library are kind of taught that sorcerers and magic are kind of this like evil bad thing, but like a necessary evil in order to like protect the town, but they're not friendly with the sorcerers. However, she slowly starts to discover that not only are her ideas of what sorcerers are maybe misconceptions, but also her and Nathaniel start to unravel a centuries-old conspiracy. I loved this book so much. What I've kind of picked up on between Margaret Rogerson's 2 books is that she has a very old fairy tale feel to her writing. It's a very classic fantasy feel, and I think that's just what I really, really love about it. So while An Enchantment of Ravens was kind of a whimsical classical fairy tale feel, Sorcery of Thrones is very much a gothic classical fairy tale feel. And I loved the gothic elements in this story. I found it very, very atmospheric. I also really liked that there was quite a bit of action in this story. Our character dynamics are so, so well done. I think that's one of Rogerson's strongest points is her character writing and her dynamics. You've got Elizabeth, who's very much pick up a sword and start swinging it and ask questions later. She's quite loud, stubborn, hard-headed. You've got Nathaniel, who's a sorcerer who has kind of this like melancholy undertone to him, but he is very charismatic at the same time. And then you've got the little demon butler, Nathaniel's demon, I guess, partner, who is just a sassy little mannerly butler who I absolutely adored, and you get the 3 of them together and they're so fun to read about. I really enjoyed the plot of this. It had like your fantasy feel, but it was very much steeped in mystery. Another thing that I liked about this was much more mystery focused, and the romance side of things kind of got pushed to the back burner. It was there, but it was not as much of a focus point as it was in Enchantment of Ravens. Not that I didn't love it in Enchantment of Ravens, but it was nice to see kind of that change in pace. And overall, I just really loved this story, and I found the plot really engaging, and I ended up giving this 5 stars. And then after that, I picked up The Grace Year by Kim Liggett. Now, this is kind of a change in gears from what I had been reading early in the month, a little bit. You know, I'd read quite a bit of fantasy, and so I wanted to pick up something a little bit different, and this is more of a thriller dystopia novel. So in this book, we follow a community where every year all the girls that turn 16 get sent out onto their grace year, where they are kind of sent out to kind of the middle of the woods in this little camp area, and they're sent there to release their magic in order to come back to the rest of the community as purified women to be married off. And so then in this book we follow our main character Tyranny as she is preparing for her grace year and about to enter it. I expected to like enjoy this book. I like dystopia fiction, but I was completely surprised by just how quickly I fell into this book and how much it really gripped me and how I just absolutely loved it. Like I could not get enough of this story, could not get enough of Tyranny's character. It starts out kind of slow paced because you're like following Tyranny as she's prepping for the couple of days leading up to her grace year. However, Liggett does a really good job of like really building the picture of what this community is and like how it's all structured and just the strange rules that are involved around the women. And Tyranny is a very observant girl. She's one who doesn't really buy what's all going on. She's one who's been questioning kind of the structure of the community and the grace year in general. And so I liked how you were getting this world built for you, but you were also getting the skepticism kind of put into you alongside Tyranny right from the get-go. And then when you get to the grace year part of the story, it very much becomes a kind of survival story, which was also very interesting to read. It did get a little slow at times, but I didn't mind that because I felt like I was already wrapped up in the story enough that like these slower portions were still very interesting. I think what I really liked the most is this is a very like feminist novel. However, it doesn't look at like the oppression of women just by society and like the patriarchy. It looks at a lot how like women pitting themselves against each other and kind of competing and kind of seeing each other as like rivals and such really plays a big part in like holding women down in society. I was really impressed by Liggett's writing style. I feel like she's got a really good balance of like eeriness to it and also like a lyricalness that just it was kind of like a haunting story, to be honest. And she's got a lot of moments where they just really pack a punch. It was just really fascinating to read, and I think if you're looking for a newer dystopian novel, I would definitely pick this up. I did end up giving it 5 stars, and I highly recommend it. And then the 6th book that I read in the month of May was A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is the 2nd book in the From Blood and Ash series. So this is a adult fantasy romance, and since this is the 2nd book, again, I won't talk about what's specifically in this one. I'm just going to kind of give you an overview of the first one. So in From Blood and Ash, we follow our main character, Poppy. She is given the title of the Maiden, and as the Maiden, she is kind of secluded away from everybody else until her ascension day to the gods. She's not allowed to have any sort of close relationships or any sort of like sense of emotional attachment or pleasure or anything like that. But she's always kind of questioned this. She hasn't like really been wanting to follow these rules. And then one day she gets assigned a new personal guard who catches her eye and starts to make her question her role as the maiden even more. And then as the story breaks open, she learns that everything that she has known about her kingdom and the opposing kingdom is not the truth. So I didn't enjoy the first book as much as I was hoping to, but I did want to try to continue the series in order to maybe see if it got any better. And I had heard from several people that they liked this one, the second book, better than the first. I still have no idea where I really fall in terms of like, do I like it, do I not, for this series. First of all, the first 200 pages of this book, it drags on. Like the first 200 pages, it's like nothing but dialogue. And I don't mind dialogue. I don't think I've ever complained about a book having too much dialogue. But this one, the first 200 pages, like I could, like, I struggled. I struggled to get through it because there was so much dialogue. And it was like, it felt like we were getting a lot of information, and I knew that we were getting a lot of information that's like important to the story in order, like, it was important stuff that we were learning before the story could really continue. However, it was 200 pages of it, and I felt like by the end of that 200 pages, it was like so much was said without really saying anything at all, if that makes sense. And I just, by the time the action finally kicked into the gear, like, I was like, thank God, like, we're finally moving somewhere in this book. Once that started happening, it did grip me a bit more. I still don't like Armentrout's writing style. I find it very bland and boring. I feel like this is a series that once you, like, have the realization that really this is, like, kind of a mediocre series, like, in general, and you have that realization and then you put it off to the side, it is fairly enjoyable. It is very entertaining. I have not decided if I'm going to continue this series because I still just don't know how I feel about it. I do know, like, I love Poppy. I'm 100% sure on that. I don't know. I ended up giving this 3 stars. I've never been so conflicted over how I actually feel about a book until, like, I got to this series where I just really don't know if I'm actually enjoying it or not. And then the last book that I read in the month of May is Bunny by Mona Awad. So this is an adult horror novel, and it follows our main character Samantha, who's in her last year of graduate school. And in kind of her cohort, there are these 4 girls that are kind of this really exclusive clique, and they all refer to each other as Bunny. And then one day, at the start of the semester, Samantha gets an invitation to kind of start joining in the Bunnies' clique and their activities, and from there the book just completely spirals into absolute madness. This is by far the strangest book that I have read to date. So I did do a reading vlog that I just recently posted where I vlogged myself reading this book, so you can see my reactions there and kind of more in-depth discussion on how I feel about this book. I really enjoyed it. I found it to be really addicting to read, and I just, like, did not want to put it down. It was really fun and creepy. Awad has, like, such a way of writing where it feels trippy and like a fever dream, but then she writes in these, like, blunt short sentences and, like, a choppiness to it that kind of, like, adds to the suspense and the tension that's building in this story. And it's just so bizarre. Like, it's such a bizarre story. I had no idea going into this, like, where it was really gonna go. I just kind of, like, thought, oh, it's gonna be like a cult-esque story. Yes, it is a cult-esque story, but it takes cult stories and it just blows them out of the water. It's definitely like a psychological horror. So if you like that kind of horror, you probably will really enjoy this book. My biggest complaint is that at the end we get like a half answer to the whole story. We get an answer to what's happening to Samantha, like the main like kind of thing that you're trying to figure out this whole book. We get an answer to that. But then when you take that answer and you apply it to this other kind of like smaller side mystery thing, it does not hold water and it doesn't make sense, but we don't have any other really like answer to that part of the story. And it just really bugged me because it was like, it's a smaller like portion of the overall story, but it is such a distinct part that like it should have an answer, like, because it directly ties into the overall big story. Like it's very much linked, but the answer that you get to like what's actually happening in the whole story does not translate well into the other kind of small thing, if that makes sense. I hope it does, because I don't mind stories that like are very open-ended and up for interpretation. However, if you're going to give some sort of an answer or like hint at something, you should like make sure to cover your bases and like do that for the entirety of the story. Like you need to make it make sense somehow. Just that really bugged me, and I was really disappointed in that. And so that was like my biggest complaint of it. I did really enjoy it otherwise, and I do recommend it. But because of that just big issue that I have, I did only end up giving it 3.5 stars, which is still a very good rating. So these are the books that I read in May, plus A Constellation of Scars and Bunny. I'd love to hear your comments below if you've read any of these books and have any thoughts on them, or if you've been interested in reading any of them, let me know. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you consider sticking around and subscribing. But as always, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!